Wel, prynhawn da pawb. Diolch yn fawr i chi am ddod i myfoniad i heddiw. Gobeithio fod chi'n ffindio fe yn ddiddorol. Fi'n mynd ymlaen yn Saesneg, achos fi'n dysgwyr, ond dyna ni. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for making the effort to come here, particularly out of such terrible weather that we've been experiencing. If you'll be forgiving me saying something slightly out of season now, at any rate, out of tempest, storm and wind. Today I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to some of the things that I've been doing since I arrived here at the library to begin my research. If I introduce all of it to you, we might be here until sometime in the middle of next week, but I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to give you a very, very broad overview of my interests, as well as developing one or two ideas in more detail. I arrived at the library to begin my research exactly 2 years ago this week. Oh, are you going to move along? Oh, good. Exactly 2 years ago this week. And my working topic is the performance and reception of Welsh traditional music as cultural history. And this remains, broadly speaking, my main field of inquiry. The studentship that I have is funded out of a block grant from the AHRC, a capacity building grant which is aimed at enabling inter-institutional collaboration. And in this case, there's a particular emphasis on digital study. I have a supervisor at each institution, Professor Trevor Herbert at the Open University and Professor Lorna Hughes here. I spend most of my time here in Aberystwyth working out the collections of the library and trying to work my way through them. The digital aspect of this project is quite important for me to keep in mind, and it informs my work at almost every level. I spend a lot of time trying to consider what it is that makes this project digital as opposed to non-digital, what I can learn from digital methods and how they change what I'm doing, what computers are better at doing than I am, not that I like to admit it, and what I'm better at doing than computers, and the directions that these thoughts lead me in for continuing my research. At the moment, I'm hoping that the PhD will produce a work of praxis, a set of case studies that are digitally produced and displayed on Welsh traditional music that will form a case study in themselves for the use of digital methods in the studying of traditional music and cultural heritage. As you might imagine, with just a year to go, I'm still quite a long way off this goal. Sometimes I'm not actually quite sure where the goal is, but I'm sure I'll find it. And one of the things I'd quite like to talk about is the development process that I've gone through to get to where I am. When I first took up the project, I could see two very different and definite possibilities, alongside a variety of other smaller and less definite ones. The first possibility I could see was producing an edition of Welsh traditional music, or a part of it, be it folk song or be it the collections of the early harpists. An online critical edition, if you will. On consideration, I decided that actually this might not work. Multimedia aspects aside, and the ability to show editorial decision-making in a different way, I thought that actually an edition is very much an edition, whether it's digital or analog, and so actually I'd like to do something quite different. And also, producing that edition had quite a narrow range of research interests that didn't fit well with the title of my project. The second possibility was a grand archive of digitized Welsh musical materials, with narratives on the sources, and again, I found a problem with the research interests. But I also realized I had a minor delusion of grandeur. The most respectable examples of this type of project have large teams of people working on them with large budgets to match, which are not entirely in the range of a PhD student's account book or even credit rating. However, as I spent more time with materials here at the library, a different set of interests began to arise in my mind. I began to see other possibilities and to develop an entirely new range of research possibilities. Things such as cultural geography, collective memory, national consciousness, remembrancing of nation, musical canon, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the role of the archive in all of these things. It was from these interests that the title of today's talk emerged, and also from the experience of looking through the documents of the library, because I began to see two types of material in the sources I was studying, and that these types were far from independent of each other. I saw echoes of musical culture, be they folk song collection notes or newspaper articles relating to concerts or lectures, and diary entries about music. Music in situation, if you like, a situated action, a situated cultural action, and the echoes of that. Alongside those iterations came the music itself, to tangle up some rather nasty musicological notions. Publications in one form or another, and reiterations of those publications that had a role in cementing particular pieces into cultural awareness and national consciousness. About a month into my studies, I was lucky enough to attend a conference here in the Drum, Mapio Cerddoriaeth Cymru, or Mapping the Music of Wales. On the one hand, I rather enjoyed it, and it was very useful to hear a large group of contemporary scholars talking about Welsh musical culture. And coming so soon into my studies, that was quite a boon. But on the other hand, I was a little bewildered, because there weren't many maps. And I thought I'd have a go at making some. I mean, admittedly, there's more than one type of mapping. There's data mapping, and there's metaphorical mapping of culture. But it made me wonder, alongside some work on digital humanities techniques, mapping being one of the more popular ones at the moment, about what it could possibly show. And so I took the nearest folk song collection to my desk that night, which happened to be Ruth Herbert Lewis's folk songs collected in Flintshire and Merioneth, and took the relevant information in the form of a mind map. For those of you who are not wholly familiar with mind maps, it's essentially a means of mapping pieces of information in relation to one another connected by lines. Generally, it has some kind of conceptual hierarchy involved, and so a large idea will be broken down into a group of small ideas, and so on, and so on. And then eventually you get to the point where you can begin to connect them together to see how those ideas form a web. As I was working on these data maps, I realized that a note-taking technique which I've been using for years, i.e. mind mapping, was surprisingly closely related to the hierarchical organization that is employed in many computer applications, such as databases and other computer systems. And I realized that by treating my notes as if they were a database and changing the hierarchical position of any given type of information, I could completely restructure how the information was organized. And more importantly, I could read it in a new way very quickly. For example, when organizing information by song, like that, I'm no better off than using the edition itself. In fact, I'm worse off because there's no music there. But if I change the privileged position of the information to, or from the song to the singer, I can begin to see what you could call personal repertories. Or if I organize by place, I could begin to see what songs were known in a given area of Wales or in a given region, and how many people might have known them. Although I should probably say that this is by no means an exact science. The fact that these songs happen to exist in the collection doesn't mean that no other songs were there, nor does it mean that no other songs were known by those people, nor does it mean that their neighbours necessarily knew the songs that they knew. And also we must always account for what the person was willing to share with the collector, and what the collector wanted to hear, and then what the collector's editor wanted to publish. And so with all of those rather massive caveats in mind, it's still vaguely useful, I think. I hope.